speak. And right now, I'm going to ask someone who you're all familiar with, has been working very diligently on a court case around this matter. So I'm going to have Mark Pettingill come to the mic and say a few words now. Give thanks. Let's give him a round of applause.
I took my shoes off so I can feel the grass. Because I won't be able to do that if I'm locked up in a hotel room for 2 weeks. And I'd encourage everybody to do that type of thing on a daily basis. The best medicine is right out here. The best medicine is right out here in the sunshine and the vitamin D. And all the things that you're not going to be able to get if you have to be forced to quarantine. You know, but I must say this. I do want to speak briefly just to the government and what they have done, because I learned a long time ago in politics, which thankfully has nothing to do with anymore, but you know, if you say the right thing, people will criticize you. And if you say too much of it, they will criticize you. And if you say too little, they will criticize you. But if you say and do exactly the right thing, they will still criticize you. So there is no win for everybody, whether there was, but there isn't. And then what we have to do is find and draw the lines in the sand where we can say, thus far and no further. So I commend the government for the positives, and let's be honest, there have been positives about how this pandemic has been dealt with. And we all got on side. People wore their masks, people socially distanced, people paid attention for the large part. But history is made by people saying, okay, well, hold on a second, where are my rights and where does the divide come where I have to say you've gone too far? Now, just briefly, and not to bore you all, but it's important, when you talk about your rights, you're talking about your constitutional rights and your human rights. And those constitutional rights are contained in the Constitution of Bermuda, which we have a fantastic written constitution, and it gives you your freedom of movement and your freedom of conscience. And that really is what we're here about today. That's what everybody is talking about, are those freedoms. Now be clear, ladies and gentlemen, it does give the government the right to say that in a crisis, a health crisis, that they can take action that is obviating of those rights. On this basis, these two key words, that they are reasonably required in the interest of public health. So the question that we must ask is the actions that are taking place reasonably required in the interest of public health? So, I'm a guy of evidence and facts, and we all should be. Let's ask ourselves this. This is the example as it stands in law in our country. One family arrives at the airport with their children. The mother of that family and her 2 kids is vaccinated. She takes a COVID test and she's positive. You all know that happens to vaccinated people, right? You all know that happens to vaccinated people. They test positive for COVID. Just positive. No slight up and down or whatever. You're positive. You can spread it, right? So she tests positive. Listen to the logic, as the law is. She tests positive. Her and her kids go home to their house. The lady behind her is not vaccinated, and she's with her 2 kids, and she tests negative. Where does she go? She goes into forced quarantine with her 2 children. She goes into a mandatory lockdown. Now, let's just think about that logically. How logically does that fly? It doesn't fly. And one then has to ask the question, is that reasonably required? Is that reasonably required? That the mother who is unvaccinated and test negative has to go in to a mandatory quarantine? That to me is the whole simplistic matter of what is wrong with this issue. That's it right there. And if you cannot, and I believe that you cannot by science justify when that is necessary, then you have to adjust your position. You have to adjust your position. Because no one can explain to me and say, that's okay, it makes sense, and it's reasonably required, and it's supported by scientific evidence that that unvaccinated mother with her children should have to go into a 12 by 12 room without the sheets being changed, eating what they tell you to eat, and locked down for 2 weeks. Where are we living? Where are we living? What's the problem with quarantining at home? Do you know how many prosecutions we've had? We've had quarantine for a while. People have had to quarantine. How many, if the government is so concerned, they're so concerned about people won't abide by the quarantine position at home, how many cases of prosecutions have there been for breach of quarantine? None. There have been zero. So if you're going to do something, you have to base it on facts. If you had 50% of the people going home that were quarantined, that were running around and coughing on everybody and had COVID, you'd get it. But that is not the evidence, and that is not the scientific facts. It just simply is not. So I beg of this government, before we have to go down the road of expensive court cases and all the rest of it, which governments win cases like that, be warned, folks. I'm not sitting here saying you're a slam dunk on a court case, because you're not. Right? They can get in and argue, and it's a matter for the court, and you've seen how that goes. You're down the road to appeals, and somebody appeals. I'm asking them, before we get there, to reasonably consider the point that I have just made. And let's be honest, your whole cabinet does not support the position. If you really honest, they do not. They have to come out here with their shoes on and stand around and say, yes, of course we do, that's called collective responsibility. But the fact of the matter is, they do not all support the stance you're taking. We already know the position of the backbench of the government. They do not support it. I would say take it to a vote in that House. Last week. Take it to a vote, and let's hear you speak to your MPs as constituents and say what you want about what is reasonable, and take it to that vote. That hasn't happened. So before we get into messy court cases, just please, please revisit that point on how you justify the sensibility of the example that I've given, because I do not believe that you can. Right? Plato said, the essence of wisdom is to recognize your own ignorance. And all I'm calling on the Premier to do, with all respect, and the Cabinet, is to just recognize that on this one, you don't have it right. Listen to the people, and let's get it right. Thank you so much.
Give thanks, Mark. Appreciate of that. Yeah, I remember one time saying to a politician that you don't always have to be right, you know. It's actually okay to apologize. But for some reason, politicians feel like they have to dig in and just defend.